Water whipped and flowed, caressing the edges of a boat coasting in the antipodes of New Zealand. An eccentric, intelligent software engineer was imagining a system of the future from a sailboat he called home. 10 years later, its heart would beat loudly, echoing across the optimistic unrest of today's social web. A true bridge between technology, technologists, and techniques. Dominic Tarr was designing something that was forward-thinking and historically informed, and not just because it was named after 19th century nautical slang. This is the unexpected history of today's most viral social network, how it works, and for the most part, where it came from. This is a story about the future, and you're in it. In the chaotic days following this year's election, as billionaires congratulated billionaires, a massive mainstream wave crashed on the shores of Twitter alternatives. This decade will be unlike any other when it comes to internet communities. Social media is being reinvented before our eyes. Almost a year ago, when I came back to YouTube, my first 2 videos were focused on the future of platforms like Patreon, and I dove into why people joined Twitter in the first place. In just that short time frame, an entirely new reality has been forged in the fires of nasty ownership decisions, overwhelming ethical pressures, and unavoidable changes to the day-to-day experience of users, some of which had spent over a decade trusting what is widely known today as the digital town squares. In this video, I want to explore the history of today's social media darling, Bluesky. As we reach the end of 2024, I think more and more from every rank of society, people are going to ask, where did all these places even come from? Why do they even exist? And bottom line, is there a reason for any of us to care? Can we trust them to stick around? That's what I'll be answering in this episode of a multi-part series. In the next episode, I'll get even more specific with the technical nitty-gritty of Bluesky and its contemporaries about what makes each one particularly different from the rest. Which reminds me, make sure to subscribe down below to see it when it hits, leave a comment with your reactions, and of course, push like to support the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. 12 years ago, Dominic Tarr posted a technical status quo critique to his blog. In just under 500 words, it started, "Would you use a hammer to butter your toast?" Right away, you can feel Tarr's poignant mixture of humor and strong beliefs, blending together to hook the reader into his argument that, for the most part, would be buried normally in weeds of code and jargon. Tarr's argument in this post titled "Death to Client Server" is plain and simple. After explaining that a database is basically like a book, a pretty good match for things like banks, he proclaims if you are building something to be used by humans with humans, a database is just plain wrong. What we need is a new kind of data layer, one that is both peer-to-peer and real-time. This, according to him, is the future. I think he was right. A few years later, after burning out at a previous job, Tarr chose a substantially new lifestyle for someone in software. He started living on a sailboat.
On an estuary.
Out there, rooted in his philosophical and technical know-how, but also symptomatic of his circumstances, Tarr created something inspirational, a for-human by human network. Unreliable and sporadic internet connectivity became an interesting engineering challenge. If you couldn't guess, Tarr was more than up to the challenge, and he built a solution with an equal part egalitarian and forward-thinking attitude. After all, this right here could be a part of the future he wrote about, the future that knew how to properly butter toast. What if isolation and disconnection could actually be desirable conditions for a computer network? Perhaps prophetic, or just hyper-aware of the flaws of the big social networks that had ran the internet world for over a decade, Tarr engineered something that would embolden the end user and break free of any need for a big brother, with no need for a traditional central database. His invention would be inspired by a seafaring lifestyle, lovingly called secure Scuttlebutt. Scuttlebutt, an old nautical term meaning shipboard rumors or gossip, is much like the modern term water cooler gossip, but instead of a water cooler, sailors would gather around a cask with an opening that had been cut or scuttled and was used as a bona fide watering hole. This reinterpretation of slang, from describing a place where sailors would dish dirt to a literal invention of a gossip protocol, reminds me of the quirky Mastodon, another decentralized network, one built by then 24-year-old Eugene Roshko, named after the forgotten animal, the mastodon, which had become extinct over 2 million years ago. Although, believe it or not, we still don't quite know the exact reason that he called the network Mastodon. The affinity for these developers to dig into the annals of history to bring life their futuristic visions is a curious little coincidence, but we'll come back to Mastodon in the next episode to compare how it fundamentally diverges. But anyway, the core tenets of Secure Scuttlebutt, or SSB for short, should sound a bit familiar to anyone attuned to the evolving realms of internet tech since the controversial days of crypto and the keywords of distributed everything. Hell, they might even be reminiscent of the era of putting everything in the damn cloud. Back in 2017, when this article was written by the eloquent Ian Bogost for The Atlantic, it sounded like a bizarre proposition, a curiosity for eccentric technology geeks. Although the goal sounds familiar, the details are strategically different. SSB is a decentralized system for sending messages to a specific community rather than the global internet. It works by word of mouth. Instead of posting to an online service like Facebook or Twitter, Scuttlebutt applications hold on to their data locally. When a user runs into a friend, the system automatically synchronizes its stored updates via local network transfer, or even by USB stick. Then the friend does likewise, and word spreads slowly and deliberately. To dive a little into the technical details, Scuttlebutt uses cryptographic technology to keep your identity and content secure. Scuttlebutt treats all data as chunks of content added to the end of a list, like a new entry in a diary. Every time that diary is updated, a cryptographic key validates the entry and connects it to the author. It's similar to how cryptocurrency blockchain works, except there's no financial speculation shenanigans and no proof of work, burning massive amounts of electricity. Decentralized systems, even if they have become the next big thing of social media, are ingrained in the history of the web itself. Hearing the term blockchain might trigger dark memories, but the vision to break apart the hegemony, to avoid a centralized, singularly controlled network, has been ever present. Before the internet even existed, there was ARPANET, designed to withstand nuclear catastrophe. Although it was made to serve a central authority, the US national defense, it was intrinsically decentralized. SSB is at the heart of our story. Even if I bet you haven't heard of it before, SSB was not just an anti-establishment platform for encrypted, automated, and local replication of information. It was but one example of the world we live in today. This phrase became reality. Atop this information, new decentralized versions of services like Twitter or anything else can be built. And so it was. The fact that Scuttlebutt was radical and that it was specifically an aggressively anarchist technical model was arguably its greatest achievement and its most significant bottleneck. In 2014, Dominic Tarr worked with his first external collaborator, Paul Frazee, who built the first client for the network. It was called Patchwork and would be the entry point for less technical users to experience the world of Secure Scuttlebutt. Being developed before the majority of its present-day contemporaries, Scuttlebutt would become a recurring point of interest, especially as the reality of Twitter and mainstream networks continue to impose limits and restrict both its user base and even more so the developer communities. That's not to say there weren't any other examples. Even in 2010, there was interest in disrupting the walled gardens of Twitter and Facebook, such as with Diaspora, something we discussed almost a year ago in the first video I posted since my return to YouTube. But it was around 2012 or 2013 when Frazee started to experiment with decentralized tech, making a couple of projects that completely bounced for people. And it was with Tarr that he really got a foothold in the space. For 2 years, Paul Frazee would work with the SSB platform, giving him a thorough chance to really get his feet wet with decentralized tech. Yes, with this tech. I don't think Frazee was actually on the boat with Tarr at any point, but correct me if I'm wrong. Scuttlebutt grew as a part of a cohort of self-starters trying to actualize the broad mission to decentralize the web. A number of exciting BitTorrent variant protocols were coming about at that time, including IPFS and DAT, eventually renamed Hypercore, and we were all working on how to make those protocols really shine. Not only was person-to-person important, Not only was local first on device important, but Frazee and the SSB community wanted it to be very easy for people to build upon it. This would be a major theme throughout the scope of Frazee's career, and in 2016, the next jump started. After working with Tarr on Scuttlebutt, Frazee would break off to develop his own similarly inspired projects, citing that he had grown disenchanted with Scuttlebutt because it wasn't scaling from an end-user perspective. Frazee took the lessons learned and honed in on a peer-to-peer browser he called Beaker. Founded in 2016, Beaker was designed to work using a pure peer-to-peer model, using infrastructure he had become well-versed in, foundations that were still intentionally not intertwined with Bitcoin or blockchain. In a move that could be appreciated even more with today's hindsight, Frazee wrote that blockchains are a huge step forward, but proof of work is a total mistake. In just 2 weeks, Frazee had a demo of Beaker up and running, hosting websites via the DAT Hypercore protocol. With Beaker, your data was stored locally and distributed, encrypted to other users who wished to share files or entire websites. As declared by this 2018 article from the indie blog Blocksplain, this is very cool because it gets us back to the read-write browser that Tim Berners-Lee originally envisioned for the web, which is true. As professed by Berners-Lee, commonly known as the inventor of the World Wide Web, who in the 90s worked at CERN in a team of about 13 theoretical physicists, I wanted it to be a read-write web immediately. I wanted to be able to collaborate with it and do GitHub-like things for my software team at CERN in 1990. And as a throwback to the last video we published this year, the first website at CERN and in the world was dedicated to the World Wide Web project itself and was hosted on Berners-Lee's Next computer. And not just that, the first browser editor was also built on a powerful Next workstation. People could make links and add information to websites. The information could flow across the team to create a new equilibrium as knowledge was added, corrected, or extended. Almost 35 years later, from Berners-Lee's browser to Frazee's Beaker, we're closer than ever to fulfilling the destiny of the internet. But by 2021, Frazee had realized that Beaker might not be the best solution to the problem. As he describes, I always knew we were trying to steer the web as outsiders, but what I didn't expect was how fundamentally hard it is to tweak how the web works. From trying to layer in social features to detangling the mess of locally cataloging hundreds of thousands of sites on each user's local machine because, after all, there was no central spot for all of Beaker's data to reside, to trying to nail down a future-proof, user-friendly developer experience for people who wanted to tinker and hack under the hood, Beaker effectively collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. By 2022, Beaker was all but shut down, although its history and its source code are still public for all the world to learn from. Yet again, trying to harness and fulfill the lessons learned and carry the heart of its mission forward, Frazee embarked on a new project called Citizen, which could perhaps solve the social layer that he had been picking apart in Beaker. The idea was to use a hybrid of P2P and servers to power a social network. As he worked on Citizen, he live-streamed every day of development. This decision made life-changing things happen. According to Frazee, 1, it helped build another wonderful community and keep me sane during the pandemic. 2, the live stream ultimately caught the attention of Jay Graber. Mistakes were made, and thank goodness they were. In 2022, Bluesky's first app would be built by Paul Frazee, today the CTO of Bluesky, and what he describes as his dream job. Bluesky. No, not the 2005 wildfire emission modeling system. No, not the 1999 cordless networking solution for palm-top computers. No, not the type of investor protection laws first seen in America in 1911. We're talking about Bluesky, the 2019 effort initially developed inside the walls of Twitter HQ. Yes, it's a broad, optimistic name for a service whose users are now wrapped in a battle against both its previous home and newfound Goliaths, particularly Meta's Threads. It may sound impossible, but but swaths of users in the millions are already flocking from some of the most iconic platforms in internet history to a 5-year-old newcomer. Launched behind an invite-only system in February 2023, a whole lot has happened this year as the platform was opened up for anyone to sign in. Since this summer alone, the rate of Bluesky's growth has more than doubled, reaching 15 million users by November 17th, rocketing to 1 million new signups a day, after being at a humble 100k users in June 2023 and 6 million in July of 2024. Today, it even appears that Bluesky has overtaken Threads' active user counts in the US in staggering fashion. From the perfectly geometric curves of the Twitter bird, famously designed by Martin Grasser in 2012, carved purely from circles meant to exude optimism and joy in its soaring pose, to the smoothly squared off edges of the Bluesky butterfly introduced nearly a year ago, which replaced the soon-to-be forgotten ambiguous icon of literally a blue sky, cut off only by the boundaries of the app icon rim itself, in the blocky, nerdy icon which gives off vibes of system administrator diagrams and server flowcharts. The icon, the name, the Bluesky design are all carefully orchestrated to pick up where Twitter left off, a diverging stream in the river of social media. Clearly, Bluesky isn't really trying to distinguish itself. Instead of feeling like a new start, I would argue that Bluesky is happily reminiscent of a baton handoff. In many ways, that's what the original goal of the technology was. It's on purpose. Bluesky, ground up, is incredibly evocative of Twitter because it was meant to be what Twitter grew into. As told by Jay Graber, CEO of Bluesky, the butterfly speaks to our mission of transforming social media into something new. I decided to keep the name when I was chosen as the lead of the project. It's memorable and symbolizes the open space of possibilities, the Twitter bird freed from a closed platform to fly into Bluesky's open ecosystem. As you can already guess, Bluesky dramatically breaks from the status quo of Twitter and mainstream social media platforms of the 2000s and 2010s. Bluesky fundamentally is but one way to read and write to a distributed network, one that is not meant to be owned or controlled by a single entity. All the products from Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, even Apple and Steam are walled in by the companies that run them. Everything you do there, technically a contribution to their servers, a point of data that you are giving to them with the expectation that you'll own it in the same way that you own the music you stream. Secure Scuttlebutt was also emblematic of an anti-establishment guideline, as Bogost put it while writing on Tarr's Resilient project. After all, isn't it odd that every online service assumes it should be a global one, for example? Such a design benefits technology companies, of course, but there are obvious downsides. When the web became popular in the mid-1990s, it promised disintermediation, allowing individuals to reach one another directly, without middlemen. But harnessing disintermediation proved hard for ordinary people, and corporations like Google and Facebook discovered they could build huge wealth facilitating those interactions in aggregate. Bluesky is not just committed to being a public fire hose without any centralized way to orchestrate the entire network itself, but as promised by Graber, Bluesky is a shift from a closed platform to an open ecosystem, from being held to the whims of private companies or black box algorithms to a protocol that makes endless options possible, and what also makes Bluesky billionaire-proof. Hell, maybe billionaire-proof should be their official tagline, when the alternative is shamelessly contributing to Musk or Zuckerberg's sickening wealth. Bluesky, at the time of filming this, has just 20 full-time employees, less than 1 per million users. Its API is guaranteed to always be open to developers. Bluesky's commitment to its values and its rich symbolism is deeply intentional. That is, besides the happy coincidence of Graber's full first name, Lantine, translating directly into the phrase Bluesky. Graber, who was handed responsibility of Bluesky from none other than Twitter founder Jack Dorsey, started their career as a digital right activist, working to protect net neutrality and privacy. Although it's impossible to fully trust anyone at the top, we have no reason to believe they are being two-faced. If there was any intent to sabotage the rapidly growing user base of Bluesky, I think the core structure of the service would be the first to give way, and yet it's the inner workings that the developers and users of Bluesky are most passionate about. Instead of opening up to a forced timeline as you would in most algorithmically controlled experiences, be it TikTok or YouTube or Threads, Bluesky empowers anyone with the motivation to curate to build their own feeds. You see, a feed is usually the main tool used to constrain, and in the case of dark places like modern-day Twitter, heavily influence anyone who opens the platform. These can be understood as alternative algorithms, widely appreciated as perhaps the most distinctive feature of Bluesky. Bluesky allows for anyone to build feeds that can even be used to replace the defaults created by the Bluesky team. You can share them and anyone can save them. If you're familiar with programming, the capabilities are limitless, especially if you consider that you can design a feed and then propagate it with posts that could be made dynamically based on whatever triggers you want. One of my favorite examples is a feed that, once someone saves it, will simply show a list of every post they've ever replied to with a pin emoji. If you're not into programming, you can use a free service, of which I'm sure there'll be many more over the coming months, as we see the volume of Bluesky use absolutely explode. For a would-be user of Bluesky, what fundamentally is the difference? Why would someone choose Bluesky over the growing pool of alternatives, particularly the decentralized voices of Mastodon and maybe one day decentralized but currently monopolized world of Threads? There's not just one concrete answer, but there are so many ingredients that make Bluesky smell and taste like a slice of the better future. As Edward Perez, a former director of product management at Twitter, offers, what do I think is Bluesky's secret sauce? A fundamentally user-centric approach is their North Star. I think this value drives product design, features, and culture. The importance of this one value can't be overstated. Bluesky's very legal structure and the features we all love stem from it. I can confidently say that since October 2022, with its small but mighty team, Bluesky has implemented more impactful and user-centric product features than a multi-billion-dollar public company with thousands of employees have done in over a decade. As Emily Liu, part of the growth, comms, and partnership teams at Bluesky, wrote in her blog post, Benefits of an Open Network, I sometimes describe Bluesky as a browser with a whole marketplace of extensions made possible by its open network. Perhaps you want a TweetDeck-like experience of Bluesky. Well, there's Deck.blue, a no-code way to create custom feeds. Try out Skyfeed or Bluesky Feed Creator. Maybe you want features like drafts or post scheduling that Bluesky doesn't have yet. Well, the creators of apps like Skeets, Tokimiki, and Skywalker provide that for you. With Bluesky, you are a member of an open network on an open ecosystem, trusting that you own your identity in an openly verifiable form. As Brian Newbold, protocol engineer at Bluesky, articulates, AT-Proto is a global, self-authenticating network, a single gigantic heap. Accounts have global identifiers, DIDs, which they use to publicly publish data, repos and records. That data is published into an intertwinkled ocean of public graph data. We are building for big world public networks. Bluesky is designed for big world public conversations. The stakes are high, but I think we have a real shot to collectively end the era of centralized social platforms. To understand a little more about how Bluesky got here and why and how it was built the way it was, let's turn back a little bit to 2019. On August 21st, 2019, Mike Masnick, founder and editor of Tector, published Protocols, Not Platforms, a work that pulls together the ethics and motivations that we've already seen coursing through the blood of SSB, Beaker, in the last decade of decentralization. As cleverly pointed out by Masnick, to be clear, this is an approach that would bring us back to the way the internet used to be. The early internet involved many different protocols, instructions, and standards that anyone could then use to build a compatible interface. Email used SMTP. Chat was done over IRC. Usenet served as a distributed discussion system using NNTP. The World Wide Web itself was its own protocol, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP. In the past few decades, however, rather than building new protocols, the internet has grown up around controlled platforms that are privately owned. Moving to a world where protocols and not proprietary platforms dominate would solve many issues currently facing the internet today. Rather than relying on a few giant platforms to police speech online, there could be widespread competition in which anyone could design their own interfaces, filters, and additional services, allowing whichever one works best to succeed without having to resort to outright censorship for certain voices. It would also allow end users to determine their own tolerances for different types of speech, and make it much easier for most people to avoid the most problematic speech without silencing anyone entirely, or having the platforms themselves make the decisions about who is allowed to speak. In short, it would push the power and decision-making out to the ends of the network, rather than keeping it centralized among a small group of very powerful companies. Based on that paper in the now defunct halls of Twitter HQ, the Bluesky initiative was born, and quickly afterwards, Dorsey greenlit the team. By December 2019, he had already tweeted out the first public teaser for the project, stating that the goal was for Twitter to ultimately be a client of this standard. Bluesky would become a public benefit corporation, a type of for-profit company that aims to have a positive impact on society, rather than focus on maximizing shareholder value. Bluesky would soon receive a grant from Twitter itself to get up and running and develop the AT protocol, or AT Proto. As its protocol grew, Bluesky also adopted and championed other decentralized protocols that would allow it to both further implement its own goals and further realize its mission of public protocols over platforms. For example, in 2021, as the concept of decentralized identifiers, or DIDs, as we saw mentioned before, was published by the World Wide Web Consortium, Bluesky jumped on the opportunity to integrate it directly with its own user identification and ownership systems, sort of one of its crown jewels. As described in this article from Richard McManus, the same author who he already cited based on his work connecting the stories of Scuttlebutt to Bluesky, DIDs are basically the same as URLs, aka a web address. It's an identifier for something, only in the case of DID, the identifier is based on decentralized technology. By contrast, URLs are managed through domain registries, which are usually centralized. By July 2023, a client app was underway, and the AT protocol was maturing, and Bluesky raised an $8 million seed round to expand both efforts, while keeping all the work open source for the public. It would continue to operate in connection with Twitter until Elon Musk severed the relationship after he bought Twitter, an act that has surely come back to bite, as even back in September when formerly Twitter was banned in Brazil, Bluesky announced it already ballooned to 3 million new users joining in just 3 weeks. By August 2024, Mike Masnick, yes, the author of the original inspiration for Bluesky, would join Bluesky officially as a member of its board of directors. Although we've covered so much already, every day the story of Bluesky and the optimistic decentralized future changes. Do you think we'll keep moving in the right direction? Have you found a place in this complicated, evolving world, or are you still waiting to see just what happens next? Either way, I'm glad you came along with me for this ride, one that feels larger than the 12 or so years that it covers. Originally, I set out to also include more technical details and comparisons with Mastodon, Nostr, as well as a cultural discussion on Threads and the mainstream takes on the situation at large. Frankly, it looks like Threads is waging war, and we're only just getting started. But as you can tell, there was already so much to investigate. I didn't want to overload this already super interesting history with more and more and more. So I'm planning on talking tech and exploring further into the corners of the world of decentralized networks, not only in the next episode, but hopefully in many more to come. I hope to see you there. Cheers and happy holidays.